Bible, I live by the concept of the Bible, which is the righteousness of every human being. And the Bible stated that man should multiply. The multiplication is done by a male and a female.
On December 4th, 1992, Shabba Ranks walked into a British TV studio carrying his Bible. He walked out as the most hated man in music.
That's absolute crap, and you know it. You two go and sit up, and we'll see what Katie's doing, because this has all gone completely mad.
2 minutes of live television destroyed the king of dancehall forever. But what happened wasn't an accident. It was the final move in a campaign that had been building for months.
I think it hurt Shabba Ranks more than it hurt Buju Banton. I mean, Buju Banton was just emerging, but everything stopped for Shabba Ranks.
They didn't just want to silence one artist, they wanted to control an entire genre. And Shabba was their perfect target. So let's get into it. In 1988, Rexton Gordon was unstoppable. Operating under the stage name Shabba Ranks, the gravelly-voiced toaster from Sturgetown had clawed his way from Kingston's dance halls to international stardom. His deep, commanding vocals cut through rhythms like a machete through sugarcane. The 16-year-old who had once called himself Co-Pilot was now the undisputed voice of a generation. His journey began in the rough neighborhoods of Kingston, where sound systems ruled the streets and DJs were kings. While his contemporaries were content singing melodies, Shabba perfected the art of toasting, rapid-fire lyrics delivered over pulsing rhythms that made crowds move like electricity was coursing through their veins. His mentor, legendary DJ Josie Wales, recognized something special in the young man's gravelly delivery and street-smart wordplay. By 1991, Epic Records executives were counting money like never before. Shabba's album, As Raw as Ever, had crossed over in ways no dancehall record ever had. The Grammy win that year, the first ever for a dancehall artist, proved that reggae's harder, more aggressive cousin could conquer American audiences, hungry for something raw and authentic. Industry veterans who had dismissed dancehall as underground noise were suddenly scrambling to sign similar acts. Mr. Loverman dominated MTV like a cultural earthquake. The video showed Shabba in flowing silk shirts, gold chains catching studio lights, surrounded by beautiful women dancing to rhythms that seemed to hypnotize viewers. He wasn't just performing dancehall, he was packaging Jamaican masculinity for global consumption. American teenagers were learning patois just to sing along, while radio DJs struggled to pronounce his name correctly. His follow-up album, Extra Naked, delivered another Grammy in 1992. 2 consecutive wins. Historic achievements that placed him alongside reggae royalty like Bob Marley and Jimmy Cliff. Shabba was collaborating with mainstream artists like Maxi Priest, Johnny Gill, and KRS-One, bridging the gap between hardcore dancehall and commercial appeal. The crossover success that had eluded every other dancehall artist was happening for him on an unprecedented scale. But success brought scrutiny from unexpected quarters. As Shabba's profile rose, activists in New York and London were paying closer attention to dancehall lyrics with forensic precision. Songs that played without controversy in Kingston's sound systems were being examined under American and British microscopes by people who had never set foot in Jamaica but wielded significant cultural influence. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation had been monitoring reggae music since the late 1980s, building files and documentation systems that would make intelligence agencies proud. They documented homophobic content from multiple artists, but most were still underground figures with limited reach. Shabba's mainstream breakthrough changed everything overnight. Suddenly, lyrics that had been confined to Caribbean communities were reaching suburban shopping malls across America.
I don't keep friends because friends change. I keep brothers and sisters.
That philosophy, the rejection of friendship in favor of absolute loyalty, would define how Shabba handled the coming crisis. When the industry machine turned against him with coordinated precision. He refused to bend or compromise his principles. When strategic silence might have saved his career, he chose vocal defiance instead. This unwavering stance would prove both his greatest strength and his ultimate downfall. Epic Records executives were growing increasingly nervous behind closed doors. They had invested millions in promoting their dancehall superstar, but whispers were growing about problematic content in his extensive catalog. Songs like Wicked in a Bed contained explicit anti-gay references that had played without comment in Jamaica, but were causing sleepless nights in corporate boardrooms where lawyers parsed every lyric for potential liability. The label knew they were sitting on a potential time bomb that could explode at any moment. They also knew that 1992 had been Shabba's biggest year yet, with his domination of Jamaican radio breaking Bob Marley's legendary record for #1 singles in a calendar year. The money flowing in was too substantial to ignore, but the risks were mounting daily. By December 1992, Shabba Ranks was at the absolute peak of his powers. 2 Grammys, international fame, and enough crossover appeal to headline American tours alongside mainstream acts. He was the undisputed king of dancehall, the genre's first global superstar who had proven that Jamaican street music could conquer the world. He had no idea that a 19-year-old named Buju Banton was about to drag him into the biggest controversy in reggae history. The track was called Boom Bye Bye. Recorded in 1988 when Buju Banton was just 15 years old, it had circulated in Jamaican dance halls for years without international attention or controversy. The lyrics were explicit and uncompromising. Boom bye bye in a batty boy head. Patois for putting a bullet through a gay man's head. In Kingston's underground music scene, such content was considered standard fare, reflecting attitudes deeply embedded in Jamaican culture. The song's origins traced back to a specific incident that had rocked Banton's neighborhood, a child molestation case involving a grown man and young boys that had sparked community outrage. At 15, Banton channeled that anger into lyrics that reflected the street justice mentality prevalent in Kingston's toughest areas. The song wasn't created for international audiences or commercial success. It was raw expression from a teenager processing violence and trauma through music. In 1992, an unsanctioned re-release brought the song to wider attention through channels Banton couldn't control. What had been acceptable in Kingston's underground scene became internationally explosive when it reached American and British markets. Record distributors who specialized in Caribbean imports began stocking the track without understanding the cultural firestorm they were about to unleash. GLAAD activists obtained copies through their extensive network of music monitors and immediately recognized the inflammatory content as perfect ammunition for their broader campaign against homophobia in Caribbean music. The organization had been building cases against multiple artists for years, but most targets lacked sufficient mainstream presence to generate significant media attention or public outrage. The song contained repeated anti-gay slurs, batty boy and batty man, Caribbean terms equivalent to the word faggot, combined with graphic lyrics about violence, including shooting them in the head and burning them alive. For activists who had been monitoring homophobia in Caribbean music with growing concern, this represented the smoking gun they'd been waiting for. Concrete evidence of music promoting actual violence against sexual minorities. But there was a strategic problem that threatened to undermine their entire campaign. Buju Banton was still emerging as an artist, building his reputation primarily within Caribbean communities. At 19, he wasn't yet the household name that could generate international headlines or mainstream media coverage. GLAAD needed a bigger target to make their campaign effective and capture global attention. They needed someone whose downfall would send shockwaves through the entire music industry, and serve as a warning to other artists. They needed Shabba Ranks.
Someone tried to explain to me that, people are so accustomed to that level of homophobia there that it doesn't really raise eyebrows.
GLAAD strategists understood media dynamics with surgical precision. They knew that going after an underground artist would generate minimal coverage, but when Shabba Ranks, already a Grammy winner with mainstream success, expressed support for the song, it would become something that would garner massive international attention and create the controversy they needed to effect industry-wide change. The strategy was brilliant in its ruthlessness and sophistication. Rather than focusing solely on the original artist, activists would use Shabba's prominence and mainstream credibility to amplify their message exponentially. His crossover success and Grammy recognition made him the perfect vehicle for attacking the entire genre while ensuring maximum media coverage and public impact. British television producers at Channel 4 were fully aware of the brewing controversy and saw an opportunity for ratings gold. The Word had built its reputation on pushing boundaries, courting controversy, and creating television moments that would be discussed for weeks afterward. Booking both Shabba Ranks and rising hip-hop star Marky Mark for their December 4th, 1992 show, they prepared a segment specifically designed to highlight homophobia in reggae music. The segment was carefully crafted with the precision of a legal prosecution. First, they showed clips of various dancehall artists, including Shabba himself, performing songs with questionable content to establish a pattern. Then they specifically highlighted Buju Banton's Boom Bye Bye with graphics and translations, setting up the confrontational question they would pose to their unsuspecting guest.
Shabba, are you a Buju Banton fan? What did you think of that piece?
Well, most definitely right now.
Shabba arrived at the television studio carrying his Bible, as was his custom for public appearances. He'd carefully cultivated his image around being a righteous man, a moral voice in dancehall who stood for traditional values and biblical principles. That religious identity, which had been central to his appeal and marketing strategy, was about to become the instrument of his complete destruction. The producers knew exactly what they were doing with calculated precision. They weren't just documenting existing controversy, they were actively creating it for maximum television impact. By putting Shabba in a position where he had to defend or denounce Buju Banton's lyrics on live international television, they were manufacturing the career-defining moment that would haunt him for decades. Those words, "You deserve crucifixion," were spoken with the confidence of a man who had no idea he was committing professional suicide on live television. Shabba thought he was expressing sincere religious conviction and standing up for his beliefs. The viewing audience heard something entirely different, a death threat delivered with biblical authority. The studio atmosphere shifted instantly from entertainment to confrontation. What had been a typical music television show suddenly became an ideological battlefield between fundamentally different worldviews. Mark Lamar, the show's sharp-tongued presenter, recognized the gravity of what had just been said and wasn't about to let it pass without challenge. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as crew members exchanged worried glances. Mark Lamar shot back immediately with absolute crap, and you know it, his words hanging in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. The confrontation was no longer about music or entertainment. It had become a live television debate about human rights, religious freedom, and the limits of acceptable speech in modern society. Shabba, still clutching his worn Bible like a shield, pressed on with unwavering conviction. He continued with his biblical justification, explaining in his distinctive gravelly voice his deeply held belief that the Bible clearly stated man should multiply through male and female relationships exclusively. His religious certainty was absolute, his conviction unshakable, his understanding of the consequences non-existent. Lamar's response was swift and cutting, pointing out that whatever biblical interpretations Shabba might hold, the Bible categorically does not condone shooting people or advocating violence simply because of their sexual preferences or social choices. The exchange had moved beyond cultural differences into territory that even religious freedom couldn't protect. The damage was catastrophically complete in less than 2 minutes of live television. Shabba had not only explicitly endorsed Buju Banton's violent lyrics, but had used biblical authority to justify what sounded unmistakably like advocating murder against an entire group of people. The interview continued for several more minutes, but the career-ending moment had already occurred and been broadcast to millions. Following the broadcast, someone in England immediately recognized the significance of what had just transpired and sent a copy of the show to GLAAD activists in America.
Someone in England actually saw the show The Word, and they saw some of the comments that Shabba Ranks made on the show.
The footage was everything they had hoped for, and more. A Grammy-winning mainstream artist with international credibility explicitly supporting violence against gay people on live television before a global audience. The activists immediately understood they now possessed the ammunition needed for a comprehensive campaign that could reshape the entire music industry. This wasn't just controversial statements from an underground artist. This was a mainstream figure with corporate backing taking an indefensible position on international television. Within 72 hours, the Village Voice newspaper ran the story prominently on its front page, with the inflammatory headline, "Boom Bye Bye." The article meticulously detailed homophobia in Jamaican music culture and specifically targeted Shabba Ranks as the genre's most prominent and successful representative. The campaign against him was swift, coordinated, and devastatingly comprehensive. GLAAD moved with military precision, contacting venues across America and systematically alerting promoters that Shabba was homophobic and that booking him would result in organized protests, negative publicity, and potential boycotts. They sent detailed information packets to television shows warning about the risks of booking him for appearances. The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, one of America's most prestigious entertainment platforms, immediately canceled his scheduled appearance after consultations between host Jay Leno, producer Debbie Vickers, and musical director Branford Marsalis. Network executives called it a human rights issue that transcended entertainment considerations. The Arsenio Hall Show, another major platform for music artists, promptly dropped him from their lineup. The Bobby Brown concert tour, which would have provided substantial income and exposure, removed him completely. Concert promoters nationwide received comprehensive information packets about his comments, complete with video clips, transcripts, and detailed explanations of why booking him would be problematic. But the campaign extended far beyond simply canceling individual shows or appearances. GLAAD announced ambitious plans for sustained national protests against any media outlets that would publicize Ranks' music without simultaneously addressing the issue of his homophobia and the broader problems within dancehall culture. Record stores across the country were systematically pressured not to stock his albums or promote his music. Radio stations received organized complaint campaigns about playing his songs. The message was crystal clear and unambiguous. Promote Shabba Ranks and face sustained organizational opposition from well-funded, media-savvy activist groups. Meanwhile, Marky Mark, who had been on the same show and performed alongside Shabba in what was supposed to be a collaborative segment, faced his own significant backlash. Gay and lesbian organizations announced plans for protests against the rising hip-hop star and Calvin Klein underwear model, specifically because of his association with Shabba's comments, demonstrating how the controversy was expanding beyond its original target. Epic Records executives watched their multi-million-dollar investment crumble in real time as cancellations poured in, and controversy engulfed their star artist. The performer they had positioned as dancehall's crossover king, and the future of Caribbean music was suddenly radioactive, untouchable by mainstream American entertainment. By March 1993, facing mounting pressure and career devastation, Shabba issued a carefully worded public apology, acknowledging that his comments were a mistake because they appeared to advocate violence towards gay men and lesbians. But apologies couldn't resurrect a career that had been systematically and methodically destroyed by organized opposition. The king of dancehall had fallen from the highest peak to the lowest valley in just 90 days. The apology changed absolutely nothing about Shabba's deteriorating situation. If anything, it made his circumstances significantly worse by alienating him from multiple constituencies simultaneously. In Jamaica, longtime fans felt deeply betrayed by what they perceived as capitulation to foreign pressure and abandonment of his authentic cultural roots. In America, activists viewed the carefully crafted statement as insufficient damage control rather than genuine remorse or meaningful change. His 1995 album, Ami Shabba, whose title defiantly means "I am Shabba" in Jamaican patois, sold poorly compared to his previous commercial successes. Released 3 years after his last Grammy win, and following his high-profile departure from his longtime agent, the album marked the official end of his Epic Records contract. The sales numbers told an unambiguous story of a career in complete freefall. While Shabba struggled desperately to book venues willing to risk controversy, other reggae and dancehall artists watched nervously as the campaign against him expanded into a broader, systematic attack on their entire musical genre. The implications were terrifying for artists whose livelihoods depended on international touring and recording contracts.
Canada is a spot for me, you know. While I was trying to make it, my first venture outside of Jamaica is Toronto.
Many established dancehall artists suddenly found their own shows canceled without explanation, visa applications denied by immigration authorities, and work permits rejected by governments citing public safety concerns. Performers with decades of experience were being dropped from major record labels as executives scrambled to distance themselves from any potential controversy. The Stop Murder Music campaign, launched directly in response to the Shabba controversy, systematically targeted dozens of Caribbean artists with military-style precision. Established performers like Beanie Man, Bounty Killer, Capleton, and Sizzla found themselves facing identical treatment. Canceled tours, dropped contracts, and organized protests. Entire festival lineups were restructured to remove artists with allegedly homophobic content from their programming. But despite the campaign's broad scope, the focus remained primarily and intensely on Shabba Ranks. His mainstream success, Grammy credentials, and crossover appeal had made him the perfect symbol of everything activists were fighting against. His destruction would send an unmistakable message to the entire music industry about the consequences of crossing organized opposition groups. As one industry insider candidly observed, the situation hurt Shabba Ranks far more than it hurt Buju Banton, because Buju was just emerging as an artist, but everything stopped completely for Shabba Ranks. The contrast was stark and telling. The established star lost everything, while the underground artist continued building his career. The financial impact was absolutely devastating and comprehensive. Concert revenues disappeared overnight as venues canceled bookings. Album sales plummeted as retailers removed his music from prominent displays. Licensing deals for his extensive catalog dried up as companies avoided association with controversy. The man who had been commanding six-figure performance fees was suddenly reduced to playing small venues in markets that hadn't banned him. He was unceremoniously dropped by Epic Records in 1996, and industry observers noted that his career never fully recovered from the controversy. The label that had invested millions promoting his crossover success cut him loose without ceremony, fanfare, or explanation to shareholders about their failed investment. What made the situation particularly cruel and hypocritical was the selective enforcement of standards. While Shabba faced complete career destruction, other artists with similar or worse content continued thriving without organized opposition. Hip-hop artists regularly used homophobic slurs and promoted violence without facing sustained boycotts or systematic exclusion from mainstream platforms.
I think it hurt Shabba Ranks more than it hurt Buju Banton. I mean, Buju Banton was just emerging, but everything stopped for Shabba Ranks.
The crucial difference was that Shabba had been caught on camera, providing activists with perfect footage for their campaign. His televised statements created visual evidence that could be endlessly replayed, quoted, and used to justify ongoing opposition to his career. Meanwhile, Shaggy, another prominent Jamaican dancehall artist, appeared on the same British television show just weeks later. When directly asked about Shabba's controversial comments, he diplomatically distanced himself by stating those were Shabba's personal views and that he didn't share the same opinions. The response demonstrated how other artists were quickly learning to navigate the dangerous new landscape that Shabba's downfall had created. The industry message was unmistakably clear to every artist paying attention: cross-organized activist groups, and face total professional destruction. Shabba Ranks had become a cautionary example, a warning to other performers about the devastating consequences of controversial statements or positions. His systematic blacklisting wasn't just punishment for past behavior, it was a deterrent designed to control future artistic expression. The same entertainment industry that had previously celebrated his authenticity, street credibility, and uncompromising artistic vision now demanded complete conformity to evolving social standards. The powerful voice that had spoken directly for Kingston's streets was being permanently silenced by corporate boardrooms in Manhattan. Epic Records released a greatest hits compilation in 1999, systematically squeezing final profits from his extensive catalog while he remained largely invisible to mainstream audiences who had once celebrated his music. The company that had once aggressively promoted him as reggae's future was now treating him as a profitable piece of history. By 2000, Shabba Ranks had transformed from international superstar into a cautionary tale whispered about in music industry boardrooms. The first dancehall artist to win a Grammy, the genre's first legitimate crossover superstar who had proven Caribbean music could conquer global markets, was now performing at small clubs for devoted fans who remembered his glory days. The mainstream success that had required years of grinding work to build had evaporated in mere months. His estimated net worth had plummeted to approximately $1 million, a substantial amount for most people, but merely a fraction of what he could have earned if his career had continued its meteoric upward trajectory. Financial analysts estimated he had lost tens of millions in potential earnings from canceled tours, terminated endorsement deals, and abandoned recording contracts. The man who had been positioned to become reggae's biggest international star since Bob Marley was struggling to maintain basic relevance in an industry that had moved on without him. But Shabba refused to disappear entirely from the music scene that had defined his entire adult life. He made sporadic comeback attempts that generated brief excitement among longtime supporters, but failed to restore his mainstream presence or commercial viability. His 2007 appearance on Busta Rhymes' Clear the Air featuring Akon provided momentary hope, demonstrating that some established artists were willing to work with him despite industry pressure. His 2011 single None of Dem on Big Ship's Pepper Rhythm showed he could still deliver compelling performances when given opportunities. Each project generated enthusiastic responses from core fans who had never abandoned him, but the mainstream media attention and commercial success remained frustratingly elusive for someone who had once dominated international charts. The hip-hop generation that had grown up listening to his music during their formative years began paying tribute to his influence and legacy. In 2013, rising star ASAP Ferg released a song simply titled Shabba, featuring the legendary artist in the music video alongside contemporary stars like Migos and Busta Rhymes. For younger listeners discovering Caribbean music, Shabba had become a historical legend rather than a contemporary artist. Meanwhile, Buju Banton, whose controversial song had initiated the entire international incident, eventually took the significant step of removing Boom Bye Bye from his official catalog in 2019. His public statement acknowledged that he recognized the song had caused substantial pain to listeners, as well as to his fans, family, and himself personally. However, this gesture of reconciliation came 27 years after the song's problematic re-release, and long after the irreversible damage to Shabba's career had been completed. The broader dancehall and reggae community had gradually adapted to new realities and expectations. Many artists began signing formal pledges through initiatives like the Reggae Compassionate Act, making public commitments to refrain from performing homophobic songs and making discriminatory statements. The industry had essentially learned to police itself proactively, rather than face organized boycotts and systematic career destruction. But for Shabba personally, these important lessons and industry changes came far too late to salvage his mainstream career. The critical moment when compromise and strategic adaptation might have saved his commercial viability had passed in a British television studio 25 years earlier. His principled refusal to back down from deeply held religious convictions had ultimately cost him everything he had worked decades to achieve.
Once he was sat down and was exposed to people that had different lifestyles and really looked and said, you know what, you're nothing but a man that just happens to do something different from me.
Today, Shabba Ranks lives quietly in New York City with his wife Michelle and their 2 sons, maintaining a low profile that contrasts sharply with his former international celebrity status. He married Michelle in 1992. Ironically, the same year his career imploded on live television, and has largely avoided public attention since then. Occasionally, he surfaces for rare interviews or small performances, but the days of Grammy Awards, international tours, and mainstream media attention are definitively behind him. The man who once proudly declared, "I am Shabba," now exists primarily as a memory and symbol, representing how quickly fame can disappear when an artist refuses to bend to industry pressure and social expectations. His story remains one of the most dramatic rises and falls in music history, a powerful reminder that in the modern entertainment business, a single moment of controversy can define an entire legacy. His biggest secret wasn't hidden in private conversations or buried in legal contracts. It was exposed on live international television for millions to witness. The unshakable belief that religious conviction and personal authenticity mattered more than career survival and commercial success. In an industry fundamentally built on compromise and careful calculation, Shabba Ranks chose unwavering authenticity over strategic adaptation. The price he paid was everything he had spent his lifetime working to achieve. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.